Good evening, everybody, and thanks for coming out this evening. I'd like to start by reading a poem called The Arithmetic of Love. And it's a recent poem. I usually don't give introductions to my poems. I like the words to speak for themselves. I may contradict myself in a few minutes with other poems, but here goes The Arithmetic of Love. When you were born, I was 35, and I watched you while you slept, wondering how our lives might intersect in a future that was yet to unfold, assuming we would both be blessed to grow old. When you would reach the age of reason, I would be 42, and a little sad when you outgrew the stories that I would like to read for you. If I was spared to share your teenage years, I hoped I would be there to wipe away your tears. Now you are 30 and I am 65, and I know how the division of your heart has caused you pain. Yet here I am, doing the arithmetic of love again. If I should have another dozen circuits of the sun, considering all the constants, variables and unknown, I would wish to master the algebra of the heart, calculate the span and engineer a plan to bridge the expanse that keeps us still apart. So do not subtract me from your tender thoughts, rather let us add and multiply new memories to prove that love. This is another poem about one of my children. I remember helping my son to learn to cycle. That's a thing that many fathers and mothers too, I'm sure, did with their children. It's called The Blue Bike. The sun is like a child rushing into my bedroom, tirelessly each morning, demanding, get up, come and play. How can I resent dreams interrupted? Such joyful presence cannot be turned away. I hold the saddle of the blue bike on a crisp Christmas day, run beside him as he pedals, releasing him, he wobbles, steadies and grows distant, praying he will not fall, hoping he will return. I'm still standing there after all these years, and the spokes of the sun still turn. This next poem is a sensual poem, and it's called A Woman's Hunger. She hears his footsteps approaching on the gravel path that skirts around the station. Full moon at 9 o'clock on a November evening. He puts his key into the lock. Her soul opens for him. Footsteps on the stairs. Suddenly he is there, undressing in the half-light, slides into her bed, apologizing for his cold hands, spoons and nibbles her ear. But she wants to be devoured, for him to feast on her, to release the wolf within the dark forest of the self. Be ravenous with desire, taste every morsel of her flesh. There are no words in his native tongue, so she begins to babble in the demonic language of awakened lust, to the tremors of a train entering the tunnel, blast of horn, screech of wheels, the hiss, the hush. While he is sated with this dalliance, she hungers still for true romance. The sound of people disembarking, trolley cases being pulled, and still her heart is freighted with the lonely luggage of love. This next poem needs a little bit of explanation because it was inspired by a true event in my life back in 1975, in October 1975, when I spent some time in Belfast. By contrast, the poem that are in my experience that immediately follows this, I'm not going to read it now, but it's First Night in Joe Malone. So I come from this experience, you'll see what it is in a moment, but I come from this experience right into the iconic hippie culture of a pub in Limerick called Joe Malone's, but this is called Trampled Flowers. True story. British soldiers pounded on a Ballymurphy door in the early hours. Cockney accents, barking Alsatians, boots that trampled flowers. They dragged me from her bed to a Saracen that sped to Castlereagh. Lover boy, bomber boy, tell us what you have to say. Some weeks later, the interrogation centre was blown to Kingdom Come, and I went home never to return, until now, to visit her grave near a hazel tree, remembering that night when we were entwined like the tendrils of sweet-scented honeysuckle, her lips red as rowan berries. I left yellow roses on the white marble gravel and tears on the tombstone where I kissed her name. This next poem is called Scars. I wish the past was like a lake, a watery surface that bears no scars. See how it heals from being slashed with skimming stones and the dagger plunge of cormorants. What hope have I then, who used the blunt instrument of the pen to stitch her broken heart, to mend and make amends, since we have been apart, when even wounds that have been sutured with a surgeon's skill leave marks that tell their stories still. Just continuing with the threading theme, this one is called Golden Threads, and it's really based on memories from my childhood about my mother and my sisters. Very short poem. Golden Threads. My mother darned my father's socks and embroidered my sister's dancing frocks. I see them in ribbons and ringlets, as in a sepia photograph, the patina of her aging hands hovering like a pair of doves, the beauty of her needlework with golden threads of love. I lived in West Cork and in a beautiful rural part of Ireland, thinly populated, and I think it's still the most thinly populated area in Western Europe. Anyway, Poacher's Moon it's called. I became very familiar with certain animals like foxes and crows in particular. Poacher's Moon. The sickle moon is raised, ready to reap a sheaf of dreams. Things are gathering in shadows. A vixen with a rabbit in her mouth, returning to her den of cubs, eyes yellow as hot coals. She pauses, stares, accuses that only men kill for kicks and causes. A poacher strides across a field, fish strung by the gills, wet grass flattened in his wake. In a farmyard, a cock struts, throws back its resplendent red head, crows in circadian rhythm, perhaps about its redundant function to announce the dawn, or invested with prophetic power, it still proudly denounces betrayals in the sacred hour. This is about my father and me when I was a boy. In 1969, the moon landing, which we watched on TV. The Old Man and the Moon. That summer it seemed the fields were spattered with moon dust as we gathered mushrooms. The night before we watched an astronaut in his silver suit swim across the snowy screen. Immortal words crackled from his helmet. When the stars and stripes were planted, my father said, "Now they think they own the moon." Summer aged into autumn. Wasps were drunk with the sweet madness of fallen fruit. The alchemy of the rising sun turned everything to gold. and in the setting sun, Montbretia blazed like the burning bush, and I was on holy ground when he spoke. This next poem is about an encounter I had with an American in Clare near the borough, an American woman from New York, and it's called Homecoming. I found myself once again foraging for inspiration in the west coast of Clare, where the sea sings its chorus to the silent stones. Beside this ocean of ink, beneath this parchment of sky, a humble scribe can merely try to honour the majesty, to cherish the mystery. I met a Yank on vacation from the neon culture of New York. She referred to the borough as bleak and barren, blind to the beauty of flora and fauna, to the mythical bed of Diarmid and Grania at Polnebron, a regal Neolithic tomb. I told her how, beneath the moon, Corkscrew Hill is suffused with sacred light, the threshold to another world. She seemed to listen with delight. We went to Keating's pub, Kilbaha, on the Loophead Peninsula, perhaps the closest bar in Ireland to New York, where people drank porter and sang sad songs about emigration and parting love and being alone. Resting her head upon my chest, she whispered, "I think I have come home." When I was a teenager, there was in the city centre a place called the Wimpy Bar. It used to serve burgers. I'm sure it's international, but we had one in Limerick. And it was downstairs in the basement. And I remember we would sometimes go there after school and we'd have what was called a Knickerbocker Glory, which is a kind of ice cream in a trumpet-shaped glass, and you would get a long-handled spoon. And this poem is called The Long-Handled Spoon. I stepped on board a song, the 1972, and before long it took me back to you. Carly Simon sang "You're So Vain," and I was wet with winter rain when we shared your umbrella and a Knickerbocker Glory in the basement of the Wimpy. The trumpet glass clinked a tune as we fed each other with the long-handled spoon. A Laurel Hill girl, skirt maroon, hitched high upon her bronzed thighs, from playing tennis, no surprise. Hair long and dark as my desire, I walked her home through the People's Park beneath a smouldering sky. My parents won't be home for a while, she said. My heart beat like a bird in hand. In the living room, shelves were bending with books, a basket of scented wood near the hearth. Light the fire, she said, as she made the vinyl spin. Logs bleeding, sticky amber resin. The fire crackled and sparked, the music ceased, the stylus hissed. That was the first time we kissed, but not the last. When I met her recently after many years, she confessed that she still had that long-handled spoon, and I couldn't hide my tears. This next poem is called Two Ships. It sounds like I'm giving advice, and maybe I am, something I'm very reluctant to do. Keen to take it, but reluctant to give it. But anyway, this is how the poem turned out. Two ships. Do not be turned rigid with silent tongue, like Lot's wife from looking back on what cannot be undone. We are two ships with our courses set. Mine is east to new dawns, yours is west to setting suns. Do not let self-pity and regrets make a desolation of your heart, for we have traversed the same dark waters, but apart. And if we should meet again, may we greet each other not as lovers, but as friends. So moving along to the next poem, which is called 13 Steps. When we had breakfast on the day we met, you took a strawberry from its bed of cream and placed it on your tongue like the sacred host. And in the antique shop in the afternoon you found a ram's horn, put it to your lips and made it moan, like the wind moving through the draughty rafters of my home. Tonight, as I climb these 13 steps of stairs to an empty bed, I remember and regret the things I left unsaid. The title of my next manuscript of poetry, which will be published by Revival Press in 2023, is called Dust and Sand. That's a phrase from a poem by one of my favourite poets, Pablo Neruda. And in rereading one of his collections recently, I was inspired to write this Dust and Sand. This morning after breakfast of freshly ground Arabica coffee and warm Danish pastry, I killed a blue bottle fly, accidentally, with a volume of Pablo Neruda's poems. I was reading when it came buzzing frantically into my world of silent reverie. I lashed out with the book to shoo it away, but struck with a Becker backhand, and it landed in a web at the corner of my kitchen window where a black spider pounced at once. It seemed there was something poetic in this death, as Neruda played his part, as did the arachnid, not just my hand. Then Pablo said, all of us are dust and sand. So this is called Poet of the People. The gods have purged his lips with burning coals. He is in the kaleidoscopic arrangement of his words. The feelings they induce, the thoughts they inspire, their narratives and evocative power. He is in the loaves you eat, the fish you fry, the loves you've left, the heartbreak of goodbyes, and in all the reasons for your regrets. He is in the deserted village, the crowded street, the solitude and silences you keep. He is in your laughter, doubts and fears. He is in the wings and roots of things and knows about your tears. He can intercede and atone for the bleeding soul who is all alone. He is in the heart of the rebel, the song of the troubadour, the lament and celebration dance, and always in romance. He is in the causes you espouse and the visions that they arouse. He is present at the birth of nations and follows their funeral cortege. He is in the face of every friend if you look carefully at his visage. He is in the earth, wind, fire, sea, and stars and every tree and flower, seldom in the courts of kings, but often in peasants' songs, forever in the sound of pipes and strings and drums. He makes the blind to see, the deaf to hear, the lame to march into their destinies without fear. He fills the hungry heart with hope, is comforting in grief, a companion in momentous hours. He is the poet of the people, whose voice is truly yours. Just a couple more now. This one is, I'm dedicating this to the poet Nizar Kabani, a Syrian poet that I love very much. The late Syrian poet Nizar Kabani, he was born in 1923 and died in 1998. And he wrote poems about women, and he wrote poems for women, including erotic poems. And in an Arabian culture that was revolutionary and radical, and it still is, and I dedicate this poem to him. The Poet of Love, for Nizar Kabani. He shaped the emptiness of the page, turned darkness into light, deciphered mysteries in her face, saw wisdom nesting in her eyes. He traced the contours of her sorrows in the vast interior of her soul, saw things dimly present, as yet unborn in speech, gave them wings with words that perched in women's hearts like prayers that beseech in yearning to be heard. When I grew up in Thomongate, an area in Limerick, there was a field behind our houses. I grew up in a humble cottage, a row of cottages in that area. And there was a field behind our houses, and it was known as the Kill. And it had a gate, a big black gate with vertical metal bars, which we used as a goalpost. And it was a strange and mysterious place, and I think this poem says something about that. A wild field behind the row of humble cottages, the Kill. Its gate, a goalmouth where a scuffed leather ball pounded like a cannon shot. And Richard, the goalie, cursed. In his defence he claimed that Holla lashed it and aimed to hurt. But we condemned him as a coward. His execution stayed when Mrs. Connery commanded us to disperse. Christie argued that she meant disband. We didn't care what she said, knowing what she meant, we ran. The gateway was a portal to another realm. Beyond its threshold, a presence felt, secret and silent memory of the soil, wherein the paralysis of night, Tuaid Adonan, would shepherd ghosts to the other world. That was the playground where our imaginations were unfurled. People said of that field that it was a burial ground for black and tans. Now I won't go into the history of all that. This one is called Unwrapping Christmas. It's November now, November the 15th, and Christmas is approaching. And so here's a Christmas themed poem, Unwrapping Christmas. Our children had grown and flown, but would return for the festive season. So we decorated the Christmas tree. I fetched 3 dusty boxes from the attic, but stumbled and one slipped and tumbled down the stairs. She cried to see the cherub with broken wings beyond repair. I made a joke about a fallen angel, muttered curses as I untangled a mesh of fairy lights which she cast like Asteria, creating a galaxy, and she tied baubles to branches with the art of Pomona, hanging fruit in ancient orchards, groves and vines. That was our last Christmas together, when the universe was mine. This poem is called Rome. I have a daughter who lives in Italy, and I've been to Italy many times, including Rome, and this emerged from one of my experiences in Rome. Tourists stand and stare at statues that stand and stare into some distant vanishing point, searching for perspective. Bare torsos of muscle-sculpted warriors wielding weapons, flaccid in the naked sun, unashamed as the bride of pure Carrara, draped in a stola that slips casually from our nubile breast. And Neptune with his Nereids, or perhaps Poseidon, rides a chariot drawn by dolphins, triumphant with trident in his fist. At the fountain where we sat in the cooling mist, and I wonder if a heart as cold as marble can be warmed by the sunshine of eternal love. And this final poem is called Her. Scent of her perfume on my pillow, smudge of mascara where she muffled her cries, her lipstick on my mouth, washed away with kisses, soft and warm as evening rain after summer drought. Sitting on the bedroom chair to unzip those knee-high boots, she pulled the ribbon from her hair, her tumbling hair, mumbling words that fell like ripened fruit. And when she stood, her silken dress slid silently like apple blossom from a tree. I still hunger for her touch and wonder if she ever thinks that much of me. Thank you very much.